None of this is by accident. And so the goal is for, at least what I do, to empower these communities so that we're not falling directly into the traps that may have already been set for us, right?
Good afternoon, good morning to wherever you're joining from around the world. It's a great honor for me to host you all from our headquarters here in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining our timely response series for parents, teachers, and caregivers. My name is Samir Mansour, and I'm the founder and CEO of No Limit Generation. We at No Limit Gen realize that not everyone has access to the world's leading child well-being professionals, especially in times of challenge. So our mission is to bring the professionals to you. In this way, we can create supportive environments for children to heal, rise, and thrive into their full potential. On our website, www.nolimitgen.org, you can find practical child well-being tools and videos on many timely topics, everything from children's mental health, protection and well-being, to healing practices and activities. So we'd greatly appreciate if you could check it out and share our content with those in your network. All our content and programming is made possible by your generous support. Please consider a donation through our website so we can continue to support you with quality programming. Today's topic is going to focus on COVID-19's disproportionate impact on children of color. According to the CDC, there are 500,000 children who have contracted COVID. And among these numbers, Black children are 5 times as likely as their white peers to be hospitalized, while the number jumps to 8 times more for Hispanic children. Among COVID-19 related child deaths, the figure is more grim, with 78% of children who have been killed as a result were children of color. There's something tremendously wrong with this picture. The pandemic has not only exacerbated but exposed racial inequities, as evidenced through crowded living conditions, increases in food and housing insecurity, and the widening wealth and educational gaps. So today we're going to explore all this further from a solution-oriented lens with our featured speaker, Crystyn Wright Diaz. So Crystyn Wright Diaz is a free-spirited mama, a wife, a sister, daughter, friend who loves to teach and learn. She has an MBA from MCNY and Florida A&M University, and is the founder of Hodgepodge Kids and Mini Endeavors, an educational and child well-being consulting company. She is also a champion for the organization Girls Leadership and an executive function coach for Beyond Book Smart. Kristen continues to redefine what motherhood and parenthood can look like, while encouraging people to break out of limiting boxes and labels to reach their greatest potential. An interesting side story here on how we met, I actually had bought a bushel of crab legs and it had started raining in the middle of this fish market when I was looking for a place, a shaded area to eat these crab legs. And all of a sudden I hear a voice from behind a tree that says, "Are you looking for a place to sit? Come join us, come join us." So Kristen graciously invited me in to join with her friend and take shade under a tree as I got to eat my lunch. And like many things, some of the best things in life come by accident. And that's really the story of how Kristen and I met. And I'm grateful for that fortuitous meeting, which has led to an event and collaboration like this. So Kristen, welcome to the show. And you're on mute right now, so feel free to unmute yourself.
Unmuted. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Samir.
Yes, we're excited to dig in. There's a lot to cover, so why don't we go ahead and dig right in. So Kristen, the CDC came out with numbers a couple of days ago that indicated that children are now making up 10% of all COVID cases in this country, which is up from 2% in April. And so as our programming reaches schools in all 50 states and over 100 countries, I see the level of concern and confusion that so many parents, teachers, and youth serving professionals are facing right now. And I'm sure as an educator, you're also seeing the same. So what has been your experience? What are the concerns that you're seeing day to day?
So there are lots of different things going on. Can you pull the PowerPoint up? So one of the things that I'm seeing is parents are reaching a space where they feel really defeated. Like they just throw their hands up. They're like, I'm over it. This is too much. Let the teachers teach them. Or I'm watching what the teachers are doing, not really feeling it. I'm also noticing teachers are feeling really underappreciated and undervalued right now, because they really want to show up for their students, but they also don't want to risk their health. It's just so many different things happening at this time where everybody's just trying to figure it out, and nobody has all the answers, right? So that's what we got going on. And we're here hopefully to give you some answers around all the anxieties that everyone is feeling.
Yeah. And we know that there's been a disproportionate impact on children of color in these times. And, it's impacting their health, their physical well-being, their safety, their learning. Can you help shed some light into why and how minority groups are being impacted, particularly at much higher rates?
So we already know that there are a lot of, I guess you could say, conditions that people already have that are making this worse. There are already a number of health disparities, being able to receive health care. So if you have people who are already not in the best shape because they're not being cared for prior to possibly contracting COVID, then it just gets worse from there. In New York City, which is where I am, what we're noticing is children are not just cared for by their mothers and fathers. They're cared for by their grandparents. They're cared for by their aunts and uncles and extended family. And sometimes those people are older. So what happens when you want to send kids into the school, but the people who are caring for them are at risk? There are a lot of nerves involved with that. It's funny, I remember going to the grocery store and seeing these two young kids with an elderly man. And I'm thinking, why is he out at the grocery store? But that's the first side of my mind. When the second side of my mind goes, he may be the only person who can buy food for his family right now. So he has to come out and take this risk. And this was in like March and April when everything was really intense. So just depending on what community it is and where people are, there's going to be a lot more concern. And as far as schooling, many people are feeling like their kids are falling behind. I think some schools are doing a really good job getting the kids the technology that they need. A lot of libraries have started to offer free Wi-Fi. So there are definitely things being done in different communities to try to help. But for kids who may have special needs or who really need that one-on-one time, it's been a real struggle.
I know we have a list of some of the other challenges that we're facing. So if we can change the slide right now, and feel free to guide the slide presentation, Kristen.
Yeah, and we can go all over with this because there's so much. But one of the things that shares is that the essential workers, there are lots of people in New York. I was really concerned when everything happened because I'm thinking, okay, so the kids are going to be home, but a lot of my kids' parents drive buses. They are in law enforcement, or they are, they have jobs that require them to be at everyone's disposal. Many parents work in grocery stores. And so that was open through the entire time during COVID. So what happens to those kids? It's stressful. It's stressful, but, there's also another side of that. One of the things that it also shares is lack of space. And so many of the communities that I've worked in, there are large populations of people in very small spaces. You might have a 1, 2, or 3 bedroom apartment with 7 or 8 people living there. So what does that look like for the child who has to pick a corner, and then tune out all distractions of what's going on around them, and be able to zone in on school? That's hard. I had a girlfriend the other day who's actually a teacher and has 2 young girls. And one of the girls put on her skates and started skating during class. But of course, she has a class in front of her, so she can't step away from that. So it's just, everybody's trying to figure it out.
Yep. But I know that, yeah, we've talked to so many families and teachers where they say you've got mom who might be in the kitchen, or we might have grandma sitting on the couch, and the child is trying to find a place to do their schooling, and people walking around in the background, and it's very challenging, right? And sometimes we might not know what's going on in this child's life or why they might be slipping behind on their learning, but there's so much that visibility that we don't have into their private lives, that perhaps by becoming aware of it, we can be more sympathetic towards it, and as a result, take effective actions to support them.
And I'm actually going to tell you to go back one slide. because I want to talk about that. Outside of just how the children are feeling and how we're feeling, like, let's think about that. Because a lot of times, you know, I've heard a lot of parents, my kids are falling behind, they need to get on top of it. The kids are stressed too. The kids are stressed. You see these faces, like, how are you feeling right now? And that's a good check-in that we'll talk about a little bit later to do with the kids. But if they are falling behind, like, what are the ways that we can support them? In addition to them feeling really sad that they can't connect with their friends. So everybody who's watching, just throwing it out there, what are your biggest concerns? Like, how are you feeling right now? I just want to get a little bit of feedback. So later when we open the Q&A, I'll be able to see a little bit of what some of the responses are. Let me open that up.
Yeah, and it'd be great to see, you know, as you put in your answers to what are your biggest concerns. Are you a teacher? Are you a youth serving professional? Are you a parent or caregiver? It'd be great to see who's in the audience with us today and what your biggest concerns are for children or children that you're caring for, especially children of color or minority groups, as the topic of our conversation is today. And so as you put in your answers, you know, kids, they often take on the stress of the adults, right? And when they see the adults face this period of uncertainty, I mean, this is the economic uncertainty, the health uncertainty. There's so many levels of uncertainty here. You know, we were looking at some numbers earlier today, and it says 34% of Black women have their jobs recovered in this pandemic, right? So the majority of them don't even have their jobs recovered yet. These are moms, these are grandmoms, these are sisters, family members. You know, less than 4 out of 10 people without college degrees, for example, have recovered their jobs. Low-income communities, you know, many of whom work in restaurants, hotels, entertainment, service industry. These are among the hardest hit industries. So there's a lot of financial stressors here that parents are facing in the home. So we have youth programs based in Boston.
Thank you.
That concerns about children who are withdrawing in a virtual environment. Setting boundaries is difficult.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Just keep it coming. You can go 2 slides forward. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So, you know, we're also at a pivotal moment where not only are we facing this, you know, national pandemic, or really a global pandemic, but it's intersecting with another national moment of social reckoning right now, where racial injustices, which have been going on for hundreds of years, are being exposed in a very visible way. And we know that systemic racism is something that is present in so many of our institutions. So I can imagine that it's also felt in our educational institutions. So, you know, being an educator, having worked with so many different communities, can you share your observation and experiences and how you see systemic racism making its way into the classroom?
Yeah, so, you know, I can't say it's making its way into the classroom. I can say we're trying to make it so that it's making its way out of the classroom. It's always been there. One of the things that I'm saying, seeing at least in certain communities, is people are choosing to homeschool their kids. In a lot of communities, people of color, particularly working parents, working moms, working dads, it's always been like, you know, that's just not a possibility for me. I can't do it. And what I'm seeing now is parents going, well, you know what? I figured it out then, and I think I'm gonna go ahead and just keep my kids home, especially because some parents are starting to see some of the things that are being presented in their children's classrooms. So I am seeing a lot more parents of color choosing to homeschool their kids because it now feels more like a possibility. Now,
what are the impacts of this? Like, how does a child who, you know, goes to school in this environment day in and day out, how does this impact them? What is the psychological impact of that? Or
let's talk about it. It's funny because when I met you in DC, I was actually on a panel the day before, and I'm going to get you this guy's name before we get off the call, but he does teach the history of our people, and he talks about how psychologically, when you first of all start learning about people who look like you from slavery, right, as if you didn't exist before then, what does it say to your brain about like who you are, about taking pride in your culture, right? The first thing you see in a book is like, oh, I was in chains, right? And then from there we go into, Oh, and then I wasn't allowed to vote even after I was freed. And then from there we go to, then we marched and we got water hosed, hosed down. And then we started to slowly creep over into feeling like we had much more freedoms while the mass incarceration system was beefed up and the privatized prison system kind of slid on in there and started creating laws so that we would be held to a different standard than everyone else. So that's the systemic part that we always refer to. Like, none of this is by accident. And so the goal is for, at least what I do, to empower these communities so that we're not falling directly into the traps that may have already been set for us, right? That's a large part of why I teach. And that's a large part of why I teach in certain communities, because there is some responsibility that we get to have in how we show up and being aware of some of the traps that are being set. So that we don't fall into them and continue some of these cycles that were created. Now, when we talk about psychology, one of the things that we saw when everything just blew up, with the George Floyd situation, is we saw people saying, well, why are they doing this? And why are they doing that? And, they should know better. What I kept thinking about is, like, when you feel valuable, you act differently. When you have something to lose, you act accordingly. If you are in a community that has been losing and losing and losing, regardless as to who's been in the administration, and then all of a sudden you can go get something for yourself, your first thought is not going to be, well, if I do that, then what about the other people? What about the business owner? You live in a neighborhood, you don't own anything, right? When you don't feel valued, when you don't feel like the spaces around you really mean anything or represent who you are and make you feel pride, then it definitely influences your actions. And so the goal is to be able to instill some pride in these communities, in the way that they feel about themselves and the way that they deal with mental illnesses, which I also feel a lot of our communities, a lot of the things that we see, whether it's murder, whether it's drugs, whether it's abuse, a lot of this stems from mental illness. And other communities are given that freedom. Oh, he shot everyone up in the school because he was bullied and he has mental illness. Whereas in our community, we're just bad people, and that's what people from those communities do. So that's the systemic part that tends to be ignored. It doesn't give anyone a pass, right? But it does mean that it's a lot deeper than just focusing on a community and saying they're bad, they do bad things, and we just need more law enforcement everywhere because that'll make it better, right? A lot of people started talking about that with police brutality, and the conversation became, not necessarily all police officers are terrible. I have family that are police officers. I have friends who are police officers. But the conversation was, and I'm glad I have this platform. Much of my friends and family who are people of color see racial things. And unfortunately, if they speak up, they then have to worry about the same people who were supposed to protect them saying, you know what, maybe I won't answer that call, because they told on me, right? So we're putting them in a position where now they are almost risking their lives by speaking up. And we've continued to see a lot of people be fired when they did speak up. So what kind of system are we really creating over there while also calling for the people of the streets to have integrity? It's just crazy to me how we want these people to speak up about crime, but those people won't speak up about crime. Why don't we start all raising our vibration a bit and holding the same standard for ourselves, whether you're in law enforcement or whether you're in the hood, so that we can all start to improve internally, and then hopefully there'll be more of a marriage of help, right? I'm helping my community, and so are you. That's what you're here for. So yes, so much with the system and so much of how it affects our youth. When they don't have opportunity, they act out. That's just what it is. So imagine if we have more programs, more youth programs, and we do well with youth programs in certain areas, but more programs, more social services, more mental health, so we can get to the root of it and not just meet it at the end when the child is finally 18, they do something big and act out, and now they're on the prison pipeline, right? So now they have a totally new reality. They're an adult. They somehow are forced to have to undo or unlearn all of the trauma from childhood and just step into adulthood and know what to do. And that's just not how it works. And people in other communities get a lot more freedom to figure things out, while also not being killed right? Or not getting charges pressed against them because their mom knew someone or they had a great lawyer. And, you know, they get a few more years to figure things out before people start to consider them an adult. And that's one of the ways that our communities tend to lose. And it's just that's a very unfair part of the system.
And you know, you mentioned something very important, which is when you are seen as valuable, you act accordingly, right? Or you
Yes.
step up into that, and you produce value. You're more incentivized, so you feel more confidence to do that. But when we live in an environment where, whether it's the media or how people are talking about a certain community, when it's laden in stereotypes, prejudices,
Yeah.
you know, what kind of value do we inherit from that? And it's almost like you adopt the persona that you're given. So can we create a, yeah,
Let's talk about that. Because one of the examples that I shared with you was when I was teaching in the South Bronx in Hunts Point, an area that's known to have some issues for years, history, if you Google it. I remember working with a teacher, kind of co-teaching, where I was coming into the school teaching a program in entrepreneurship and, you know, helping the kids learn how to get into high school. And I had a teacher who I noticed, it was right around the time of the election. The teacher said to the students, like, well, this person won. And so you just need to deal with that. And that's what it is. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. You know, I'm always curious. And then at one point there was a class, English learners, and the teacher says to me, I don't understand what's wrong with these kids. It's just like they're animals. They just come here and they can't talk. They don't know what we're saying. They act out. They're just like animals. It's like something is wrong with their brains. And I'm looking at this man in horror, like, this is their teacher. This is what he thinks of them. Why is he here? Right? You know, the teacher also shared at some point that they live somewhere upstate. And so that's where a lot of times teachers, even the ones who do care, you know, really, really deeply care about their students, get the bad rap for coming into the city teaching and then going back home. Because you have teachers like that who are in the classroom who do not like the kids, who don't necessarily think very highly of them, where you have these other teachers who do. So it's, you know, it's kind of like somebody just said bad apples. There are bad apples everywhere, but when they don't get rooted out, they can kind of stink it up for everyone. And, you know, I always say when you are in health services, when you are a teacher, or when you are a police officer, you do have a higher standard, right? Because the biases that you come in with and the judgments that you come in with actually determine the trajectory of someone's life, right?
100%.
If you're an officer, you could kill someone. If you're a teacher, you can literally shut somebody down about learning and about expansion for the rest of their life. They may have a bad taste in their mouth about education because of something you said to them that stuck, right? If you're in, you know, health disparities, if you are someone who's a nurse or a doctor and this person is telling you this hurts, it doesn't feel good, and you're like, oh, you people are strong, you'll be fine. You know, somebody saying I'm not okay. You know, Black women are dying at higher rates when they give birth. Across all socioeconomic levels. So these are things that keep showing up in these different institutions. And until we address it, are honest about it, then we can't start to heal.
Yep. And one of the things you just mentioned that I'll pick up on is one of the core pillars of this organization is that, you know, when we see children as their potential, when we see them as their potential, children are more likely to step into that potential, right? Absolutely. So it's not seeing, it's almost like you might see something, you might see behaviors that you don't approve of or are counterproductive, but we're constantly holding them in our mind as who we think they are fully capable of becoming. Because when we believe the child is capable of that, the child will step up. But these racially charged attitudes are counterproductive to that and will only serve to, you know, keep the cycle alive.
Absolutely. And it's funny, just a quick shout out. You mentioned I do work with Girls Leadership, and they have a program called the Power Collaborative, which is where we train teachers, youth providers, youth program providers on healing centered teaching. We talk about biases. We talk about so we do a little bit of social emotional learning, yes, but we also address how some of the biases we bring into the classroom without even knowing it can affect some of our students. One of the things that's posted is, are you on scholarship? You know, like, why are you here? There are things that students can say in a classroom to make other kids feel like they're not worthy of being there. And then even as teachers, one of the things that I do with consulting is I coach teachers. They call me like an innovation coach or what have you. And a lot of teachers that I've met have really great intentions, but we know that intentions don't always determine impact. And a couple of the teachers that I've worked with, once we started talking about the language, right? You know, one of the things that come up is like, sometimes we'll tell a child, like, you need to step outside for a minute, right? They're getting a little rowdy, elevating. Whenever I would ask a student to step out, I would also say, like, I really want you to come back in. I really want you here. Right now, the space that you're in is not productive, but go outside, take a drink of water, take a breather, and then come back because we need you here. So there's a huge difference, right? We're both asking the same thing, but I'm letting you know that you have value and that I see you and that you're valuable here. This is where I would like for you to be. And that really does change the way that the student receives what you're saying when they realize that they are wanted, they are valued. So I'm curious, there's a question at the end, just feedback from those of you who are in the audience. Has your child ever told you about a teacher sharing something uncomfortable? Something just popped up recently on Facebook about a parent who was listening in on a teacher speaking about politics. And the parent came in and livid because of some of the things that the teacher was sharing with the class. And then some of the kids who kind of jumped in and pounced with some information that felt very racially charged. So I'm curious as to if any parents have experienced anything like that. There's an organization, I want to say it's called the Black and Brown Report, if I'm not mistaken, blackandbrownreport.com. And it's feedback from parents all over America on the schools that their children go to, whether it's private schools, charter schools, public schools, because a lot of people who were putting their children in these private institutions, the lady who created it said, you know, I'm spending all this money to put my child somewhere where I feel like they're going to learn better, and then spending even more money with the therapist trying to help them after they've been, you know, treated poorly in these institutions that were supposed to be elevating them, you know, educationally. Now they're suffering mentally and psychologically. So this happens not just in poverty-stricken places, it's also happening in very affluent places. I don't know if you guys caught the hashtag Black at. It's like a whole list of them. If you go on Instagram, people sharing their experiences of how they were treated because they were Black or brown.
You know, you mentioned something so important, and I'm so glad you brought up that example about, you know, when a child is acting out and, you know, kicking this child out of the classroom. And it's oftentimes, you know, when the child is quote unquote acting out, this child is trying to be heard, right? This child is trying to have a listening ear. And this is an opportunity, as you said, to make them feel valued, make them feel like they have a space, but it's also an opportunity to check in, right? And find out what's really going on.
Absolutely.
Because they're not acting out to make your life difficult. That's not what the child is trying to do. That's a cry for help right there.
Yeah. And one of the things, go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, one of the things that we talk about in the Power Collaborative training or workshops is the different responses to trauma, right? You don't always know who you have in front of you or what they experienced at home. And so you have fight, you have flight, you have freeze, and you have fawn. You got some kids who are gonna wanna fight. Okay, that's what it is. That's what they know. That's the way that they handle experiences. When things are uncomfortable, they get angry, they blow up. That's what they know, right? Doesn't mean it has a place in your classroom, but it does mean you don't need to take it so personally. And I've seen that happen a lot of times where teachers are like, I just do not like that kid. You know, we all have those feelings around the kids who may show us like high levels of disrespect, you know, and I'm not saying that it should ever be tolerated. But whenever I see certain types of behavior, before I take it personal, my question is like, what happened, right? Then you got kids who will just leave, right? I'm not dealing with this. You got the kids who freeze and shut down and just will not respond to you at all. And then we have fawn. And that's something that a lot of teachers don't talk about, that we talk about heavily in the training, which is the kid who usually you can't figure out the trauma because they're so busy helping you out and, complimenting you and attaching themselves to you and cleaning up the classroom and telling the other students to quiet. Normally we gravitate toward those kids and we're like, oh, they're just the best kid in the world. And granted, we definitely enjoy having kids who make our lives easier as teachers, but that's also a trauma response. And if you notice that a student is kind of overdoing it, instead of acknowledging them just because they're doing those nice things for you, you can also let them know that you're valuable whether you do that for me or not, right? I don't actually need you to do kind, funny things for me to like you, to teach you, to support you here in this classroom.
And just to reinforce your point, most of us are familiar with the fight or flight, but there's also freeze. And now we're talking about the fawn or the appease. And this is important. Where does this come from? It's because, the child may be acting in a way in which they're trying to appease an abuser at home, right? Because that is their way of surviving. They don't want to ever do anything against their abuser. And so the way they do that is by complying. And from the outside, like you said, it's very difficult to know whether this child is truly being abused or facing a challenging situation at home, or if there's something that's truly going on that needs to be addressed. So we've spent some time understanding what the issues are that these children are facing at this time. And we can only meaningfully address these issues once we've diagnosed them. So Kristen, what can we do as educators, parents, guardians, and youth serving professionals to create more open, inclusive, and welcoming spaces for children?
All right, so glad you asked. So one of the things that we talk about is creating supportive environments for children of color, creating inclusive environments and welcoming spaces. And what that means is making people feel like they belong, right? We talked a little bit about othering. Why are you here? Do you belong here? That's always going to make someone feel devalued. And honestly, when it comes to kids, as adults, we can put our finger on it and say, oh, I know what that is. Children can't always put their finger on it. And so they internalize it and they think something is wrong with them instead of something is wrong with y'all, right? When it comes to what we're doing online, a lot of the virtual learning, offering grace to ourselves, to our teachers, to our children. We are all just figuring this out. And that doesn't mean that our children get to fall behind because we're figuring it out. But it does mean things are different now. Things are different now. And we get to reimagine what this is going to look like. And also think about what can be good about it, right? Like, what are some ways that my family can actually benefit from this time together? What are things that I can do now that I wasn't able to do before? Healthy spaces at home, stations, if the space allows, create a workspace station for your child. Make it so that they can sit, in whatever corner they're in, have their headphones or have their laptop or whatever it is that they may have been provided with their pencils and, organization and structure. That's going to help the little ones a lot. And with the older ones, check in. Last time there were kids who were telling their parents they were showing up for school every day only to find out that they were failing because they would log in, say hi, and then log off. So, keep checking in with the kids to make sure that things are good.
What does a meaningful check-in sound like? How does one prepare for that check-in, and how does one conduct that check-in?
Well, there's a checklist a little bit later of some of the types of questions that we might want to
great.
be able to
So
ask
we'll get to it.
our children.
Just teasing it just so you can stay on.
But helping them build healthy self-esteem, encouraging them every day, doing affirmations with them, and just creating positive experiences in the home and outside of the home. Because if the schedule does allow a certain amount of flexibility, then maybe you can actually do things outside. And that's what the next slide focuses a bit more on. Can you go to the next slide, please? So takes a community, right? like I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of parents who are essential workers or who may have to physically go in and do something. So that's when we get to call on others. I think I saw somebody, Jody, in here. If that's the Jody I know, I don't think she used the alternative, but there was a space where my nephews do karate, and they opened it up for parents to be able to send their kids in while they were working. And they created stations to help the kids do their work throughout the day and then have karate class after. I have another friend whose daughters went to a place where they did double dutch, and they created the same thing. There are little, places popping up in the community right now where people are coming together and saying, let me help you with these kids. So being able to, she said that's right, being able to find spaces that accommodate that. Now, I will say that's a big ask because sometimes it can be a strain financially. And if you're not in a position to be able to afford that, then what do? Friends and family. Like, now is the time for our community to be able to come together. There are a lot of social media groups right now that are helping people with homeschooling. They're offering curricula. There's also cultural learning platforms that exist. One of them is Rise Educational Village. That's one that I found on Facebook, where she's actually teaching from a culturally informed perspective. And the students are able to learn about their history and learn about their culture, and they're doing interactive things like school looks different. Doesn't have to look the same for everyone. And now we're seeing that, right? It doesn't have to be where you go in order every day. People who understand the Montessori approach are now starting to get, when the kids are home, oh, okay, this can look different. My niece is being homeschooled by her grandma right now. And every day she shows up to school and says, hello, teacher. And they sit down and they read and they do math. And sometimes she says, I don't want to do this right now. I want to go for a walk. And they go for a walk. So it's good to be able to utilize family if you have that type of support, rather than something that often women in my community do, like, I got it, I don't need any help. Get some help, sis. There are no awards for struggle. So if you do have people reaching out who you trust, then bring them in and let it be a community situation. Get out, go for a walk, go to the park, breathe, meditate. Like, there are things you can do as a family to help everybody come together and also calm everybody down.
On that, homeschooling piece, and so many children are at home right now. We had these homeschooling instructors on a previous video, so you can see it on our website and our COVID response series. But to your point, a lot of the times children at home, since home is not a natural, or their normal learning environment, they might be bored or agitated by sitting in classes in front of their Zoom screen. And one of the things that these advocates of homeschooling suggested was, take a child-directed learning approach. Learning can happen. It doesn't necessarily all need to be academic at this time. Watch what they're naturally curious about at the home. What are they watching on TV? What are they flipping through in their books about? What are they naturally curious about? And build in learning initiatives into that natural curiosity. And so learning can happen, and it can happen in magnificent ways. It doesn't necessarily need to follow this trajectory that's been set forth in the curriculum and outline. Because, a lot of that, let's face it, we're in interesting times, and it might not be fully possible to stay fully on track with that, but it doesn't mean the children are being compromised in their learning in any way if we create the right environment around them.
Absolutely. We've always known that there's so many different ways kids can learn. And, I think here in America, there's been this charge to try to compete so heavily with the rest of the world. We got to get our test scores higher, and we got to do this. People are different. We're all having really different experiences, and there's value in every community and every culture. And sometimes what we do when we focus really heavily on the analytics of it and the stats of it is we forget that we're missing these gems of things that kids could actually be learning for life outside of just the academics. One of the programs that I've taught in the past is entrepreneurship. And I tell people that's one of my favorite things to teach, because I've gone into classrooms with children, special education classes, who were labeled as difficult, may have had learning disabilities or behavior issues, only to find that, sitting down and, reading with them about business or reading a story and talking about business ethics and coming up with a project. Number one, money motivates everyone. I haven't had one kid not be motivated by money. Number two, each person in the room had a different role. I remember having one kid who did not talk at all. This kid could draw, and he was so excited about being able to do the ads. He barely spoke a word to me, but he made some awesome ads. There was one kid who was not so great with math, but he had the gift of gab. And he was the one who was going to sell any and everything to whoever was in front of him, and he did really well at it, right? I had some kids who were great with numbers, and they were like, no, if we do this and we do that, then we're not going to make that much. So we need to come up on that charge. So it's like each person in the room had something different that they were good at. And entrepreneurship in business is not traditionally taught in our classrooms. That was like a special program I was contracted to come in and teach. One of the things with my company in online learning is we have a whole day of just mindfulness. Now we slide learning into everything because, listen, my Aunt Tree, she was like, she's the matriarch of the family, and she's the one who instilled the learning foundation in us. We used to go to the Statue of Liberty when we were little. I climbed to the top and stared out of the crown. We climbed the Empire State Building. None of these things were fun when we were actually walking up the steps because she would never pay for us to take the elevator. But we were learning every day. We were learning with everything that we were doing, and we didn't even realize we were learning. And so this is the time where parents get to start having those educational talks with their kids and making learning fun in all kinds of different ways. So the child doesn't even realize I'm learning right now. When my daughter was like 5, I remember teaching her about nouns, and we used to just go for walks or sit in the car, and she would like point out, if it's a person, place, or thing. Like, oh my goodness, mommy, a tree. Oh my God. It was rough because once she really got it, she got it. But it was fun, and those are really simple, no cost ways for children to be able to learn and really have fun while they're doing it.
And just to pick up one point that you mentioned as a segue into our next, it's so wonderful. I think you had what you said. You have Mindfulness Mondays as a part of your program that we'll talk more about in a little bit. So I think that's beautiful because in order for children to learn, they have to be in the emotional state to learn, right? They get to be in a place where they're calm. They get to be in a place where they're feeling centered and balanced and supported. When they have those ingredients there, then they are receptive to what you are giving them. But if they don't have that sense of centeredness, calm, or feeling of support or safe environment, then guess what? Their attention is elsewhere. They're not going to learn. Anything you're putting their way, it's not going to stick.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that because it's not just children. I taught a program where I coached the facilitators for a program with an organization called Social Change Agents in South Africa about 3 years ago. And every day we would go into this community, this village, and, we took different leaders from around the village and, brought our expertise in different fields and also listened and learned from them, right? You never show up feeling like you're the only expert because people are experts of themselves and their communities, and we get to honor that. But there was one woman who kept showing up, every day she would come. And then one day she came in and she refused to eat. She refused to eat breakfast. We provide breakfast, lunch, and, for them every day. And she's like, I don't want to go to class. I'm not eating. And we're like, so you don't want no food? And as it turns out, she had 14 children at home. Some of them were her children. Some of them were her mother's children her mother had passed away and left children behind. And she was thinking, I keep coming to this place. I'm eating all this food. My children are hungry. And so if my children are hungry, I'm not eating. And one of the things we would do at the end of the program was like buy lots and lots of groceries and then, to kind of drop it off in those communities for the people. But, when she couldn't eat, she couldn't learn. And sometimes we forget, like, let's go back to the basics. As adults, when we're hungry, we usually become hangry because if you can't eat or if you are hungry, you're not registering anything anybody is saying. If you are tired, please, adults, you can comment on this. If you are tired, there are a lot of people who are like, if I'm tired, don't talk to me. If I haven't had my coffee, don't talk to me, right? So we get to think about how kids are affected when things just aren't right, how hard it can be to learn when you don't have your basic needs met. So mindfulness comes hand in hand with that, right? In addition to having some food in your belly, how about a little bit of peace of mind? And we can create those spaces even in really tumultuous places. That's one of the things that I talk to my little ones about, especially when I'm in really, really rough neighborhoods. I always teach them about visualizations. And I'm like, do you know that you can take yourself to any place you want to go in your mind? You can live in the loudest home and you can still find a spot in the corner in a closet and you can zone out of here, right? And sometimes that's all they need until they're able to actually physically remove themselves from the spaces that they might be in if they feel like they're in an environment that may not feel super safe. So here are some things that you can do. And at the top, it says social emotional learning check-ins for distance learning. Girls leadership, if you go on the website and type it in, I feel like there's a link somewhere in here. There's like a whole list of different things that you can do with your family. It's an awesome list. Jordan and Catherine, shout out to them if they're watching. They created this list of things for parents to do, and they are low cost. They just require some time and a little bit of thought. And that's something I feel like every family can use if they're able to create that time. So the 5-finger mindfulness breathing. The 5-finger is like where you think about, 5 things you see. I want to say 4 things you hear, and you just kind of go down a list, 1 thing you feel. With my program, with Mindfulness Mondays, we always do, 1 thing you see, 1 thing you hear, 1 thing you feel, 1 thing you taste, 1 thing you can touch. It's just grounding, like being aware of yourself. This is where I am. This is what's going on. Okay, let me take it all in so I can figure out my next step, right? Instead of just constantly having confusion and not being able to say, okay, this is where I am right now, right? That's something important for adults too. Another one says take 30, right? If you look on the list, it says take an hour, but I'm clear that there are a whole lot of places and circumstances that sometimes we just don't get an hour, right? So what if you have 30 minutes to yourself, right? If you have older children, I know when you have young ones, sometimes those 30 minutes mean they're sitting right there next to you. But even in that space, teach your child how to respect your boundaries and how to create space and time for themselves, right? Mommy's going to read and you're going to color. We're going to do this for 30 minutes. I'm going to burn a candle. You're going to talk to yourself. I'm going to talk to myself. This is what it looks like to have self-care, right? It's not always nails and massages. I mean, it is for me. I enjoy that. But sometimes you get to do something that is no cost at all just to make yourself feel good for the moment. So create those times in your household where everybody gets 30. We can meet back up at 5 or we can meet back up at 6 to eat. Right? But this is time to be with yourself. So that's self-care, self-compassion. Another one of the things it lists is cultivating and practicing joy. There are some communities that have been beaten down so badly by society and or maybe sometimes the culture that you come from just says, yes, joy is a form of resistance. Thank you. Thank you, eye-opening enterprise. There are some communities where it's looked down upon, to really just enjoy yourself. And I'll be honest, even during everything that was going on in May and June, it was like a pause. I didn't even want to experience joy. Things were going pretty well for me, but I was like, this is not okay. My people are not okay. I'm not okay. And there was some guilt that came with that. But like that person said, joy is actually a form of resistance. If people are telling you that taking time off, taking care of yourself, that's something that's been ingrained. If we want to talk about systemic, right? You had people working in this country for free for hundreds and hundreds of years. And then as soon as they weren't working for free anymore, they were coined as lazy. How does that work, right? The brown people who come into this country and pretty much work themselves from the bottom up are taunted as if they're taking when they are working 14, 16, 18, hours a day. And then being told if you just work harder, you'll get what you need. Take a break before you have a heart attack and pass out and die. All right. You get to take care of yourself. So it says practice and joy, evening check-in with your family, everybody at the table, or even, individual check-ins if you're not a family who sits down and does dinner together. Share your day highs and lows. How are you feeling? This is how I'm feeling. This is what happened with me today. Have a dance party. If you can't all agree on dance, then pick a Versus. Versus has been so lit for me and my family, okay? Me and my daughter were jamming to Patti LaBelle and Jill Scott and all the people in between. That's a good time, to plan with your family and go out on the weekends. For those of us who are on the East Coast, it's about to get cold. So take advantage of, you know, the fall activities, the festivals, the park, if you're not comfortable going around people yet. And then establish some consistency. You know, make sure that you guys can have a loose schedule, but we're going to bed at the same time every night. Or maybe once a week, we're planning to do this together as a family. And that's also one of the things that my company created, a lot of family programs, so that families who would like to have that special time set aside together, they can all show up at 7 and do a cooking class, you know, or all show up early in the morning and do yoga together. And then you asked earlier about check-in questions. So you guys can see the different questions. I don't have to read them, but if you take a look at them and there are any that stick out to you as something that you would love to be able to have a conversation with your kids about, then put those different questions there. Or if you want to add any questions in the chat that you may be having in your households that, you know, have the kids talk a bit more, then drop some of those questions.
Absolutely. And thank you for that, because, you know, on these programs, we stress the importance of self-care before childcare. We can't give if we're giving from a depleted well, right? Anytime we're on an airplane, you know, what's the announcement? You got to put your own mask on before you can help anybody else. And I think as a result of that, you know, it's just known on so many different levels. You'll be more effective. You'll be more healthy. You're going to be more creative in problem solving. And your kids are going to get to benefit from the presence of a caregiver who's more effective, healthy, creative. And as a result, they will thrive and they will become more confident in dealing with adversity and building resilience themselves. The kids watch us with everything we do. So if we're constantly self-sacrificing and, you know, so us as caregivers, we're all probably caregivers on this program. Us as caregivers, we have this self-sacrificing attitude, right? Like we got to save everyone, and that's great, but you got to save yourself first. And so these are wonderful practices that you can do. You can find them on Kristin's website. Let's put in a plug for that website right now, because you teach these.
Sure. Is that on the next slide?
Yeah, it's on the next slide. Go ahead and you can put it up there.
All right. So my website is hodgepodgekids.com. I'm the executive director, and we have 3 different segments right now. We have Hodgepodge Academy, which is for pre-K to 2nd or 3rd grade. It's subscription based. You can, you know, purchase for the week, for the month, or for the quarter. And we have 4 modules for every month. So it starts at the beginning of every month. The first week is about self. The second week is about family. The third week is about community. And the 4th week is about world. So the books are centered on those 4 things. And then each day of the week is something different. Mindfulness Monday, where we usually do read. Of course, we always pull things out of stories, but we talk much more about like how we feel and what we see. And we do affirmations, and we do like a scavenger hunt and bring something back that makes us feel good. Tell Me a Story Tuesdays, we do storyboarding. So I always like to pay attention to the multiple intelligences. Sometimes we sing while we're drawing our stories, and we sequence the stories, and we, you know, follow the order. We pull out the characters. We talk about the setting. We rewrite the ending. So there's just a lot of drawing and a lot of, you know, verbal exchange. Even though they're pre-recorded, trust me, the kids respond. Wonderful Words Wednesdays, where we actually teach nouns, verbs, and adjectives to little children, because they too can figure out the concepts of looking for a person, place, or thing, and how do you describe someone, and, you know, what does that person do? So that's a lot of fun. Think Math Thursdays is taking all the different facets of math. So each lesson we do bar graphs, we do addition, basic addition and subtraction. We do arts and crafts at the beginning. So we're usually cutting shapes, because shapes are also part of math, right? For the little ones, we're coloring. And Free to Be Me Fridays is exactly what it sounds like. We dance, we sing, we do drama. Sometimes we'll be painting or cooking, because that's just as important for the kids, right? We're saying that adults need to learn how to have that free time, do things that they really enjoy. So do kids, right? So that looks different for everyone. So right now, if you go on the website, you can drop your email address, and, you know, we email you everything. If you're interested in that particular program, that's like our big program. Then we also have Hodgepodge Classroom, which is live certified teachers, all academic subjects, SAT, math, science, ELA, English learners. And finally, Hodgepodge Creatives, which is live creative arts classes. So right now we got art, we got drama, we got dance, musical theater, yoga, cooking, sewing, puppetry, and creative writing. And the teachers are awesome. We have one woman doing Caribbean cuisine once a week from Jamaica. Awesome. We have somebody doing puppetry, hip hop mommy and me classes, yoga, family yoga. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Those classes will launch mid-October. So also if you leave your email address, whenever the next thing is released, everybody gets an email. And those are live classes. So even if you're not able to make all the dates, they're recorded. You have access to them for the next few days so you can catch up on your class. And like I said, the teachers are awesome. And we also have like small group, large group, and one-on-one. So if you want a live tutor or something like that, you can do that as well. So if anybody has anything,
busy.
Yeah,
you've been busy over quarantine, so you can see all this is available online, and she actually put all this together while in quarantine to support all the families and the teachers, educators, social workers out there to have an incredible set of resources, to support your children, to support your needs every week. So it's a really wonderful selection of learning and live classes. So I hope you guys take full advantage of what Kristen has put together. And so we'll break here for any questions that the audience has. I know many of you might have questions. And in the meantime, I think we're getting lots of thank yous coming in. So we'd love to answer any of your questions while we still have her for the next couple of minutes. And, as questions, a question or two pop in, what can social workers, teachers, educators do at this time to check in with children in a thoughtful way? Many of us are socially distanced right now. What can we do to just check in? What are some ideas you might have to check in and see how they're doing?
Well, for one of the things that I noticed, and I mean, this is like a person by person basis. There were teachers in certain communities that did like drive-bys to the neighborhoods where the kids all came outside and they were like beeping the horn and waving to the kids. So it was like socially distant, but it made the kids feel so special. And the teachers who are like longing to see their kids again felt really good about that too. But there are also schools. My daughter's school has, they do a check-in. They have counselors that meet with them during advisory every week. So I think it's really valuable for all schools to have some form of advisory so that we're not just checking in with the kids academically and we're asking those questions to see what else may be going on, because there's some kids right now who really need support outside of their homes. So checking in, asking how they're doing. It is difficult on Zoom, when you're teaching a virtual class, it's hard to see that every single student is okay. But, depending on how the school works it, my daughter's school also has one teacher that each person or each student has to check in with regularly. So that teacher is making sure that you're caught up on everything. Do you have any questions? That's something that kind of starts at the administration and trickles down. But I would encourage the other teachers, if there isn't something like that at your school, to encourage your administration to create something like that, because that's the way that you get to stay connected with kids, even though you can't physically be with them.
Yeah, proper check-in plan. And, if you're Zooming with your children right now, if it's a large group, put a plug out there. If there's anyone who wants to stay back after everyone's signed off and have a conversation, I'm here for you. There's many ways of doing it. We've heard other ideas, for example, many homes that are receiving food assistance, whether from the school or from the community programs, having slips in there, right, that go directly to the children that say, hey, reach out if you need any support for anything, we're here for you. So just letting them know you're there for them can make a huge difference in helping the child feel supported. So special thank you, Kristen, for taking the time to teach us today. And for those who helped organize the event, Kara from it, and all the viewers for your wonderful support and for taking the time out of your day to be here and to learn more about Kristen's work. You've got her website, it's hodgepodgekids.com, where you can find access to all her wonderful programs. And please consider a donation if you found this workshop useful, so we continue providing this quality program. We love your feedback. So any feedback you have, feel free to get in touch with us through our website. And thanks again, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Samir. Thank you all for being here.
Absolutely. Bye-bye, everybody.